Somewhere over Sweden, a fighter jet is flying a combat mission without a pilot. In May 2025, an AI system called Meteor took the controls of a Saab Gripen E and flew 3 beyond visual range sorties, choosing how to maneuver, when to commit, and how to win a simulated dogfight against a live opponent. And while this will undoubtedly make the Swedish Air Force one of the most powerful and technologically advanced in the world, that's only a part of why this development is important. More importantly, this is the aircraft Ukraine has now signed up to buy, and it's the single most advanced thing to come out of this entire partnership. And it has the potential to stop Russia dead in its tracks. So let's start with the machine itself, because once we understand what the Gripen E actually is, we'll understand why Moscow has every reason to be worried. The Gripen E is built around a General Electric F414 engine that allows it to top out a little above Mach 2, somewhere around 2,100 kilometers an hour. It carries 10 hardpoints, an internal fuel load of roughly 3.75 tons, and it can lift off and recover from a stretch of public highway with a 6-man pit crew. But the raw numbers are not the headline. The headline is what the Gripen E carries inside. At the heart of the jet sits the Leonardo ES-05 Raven, an active electronically scanned array radar mounted on a repositioning swash plate, which lets it physically swing the antenna to see further off to the sides than a fixed array can. Bolted alongside it is Skyward G, an infrared search and track system that lets the jet hunt without ever switching its radar on, staying silent while it builds a picture of the sky. And wrapped around the whole airframe is the Arexis Electronic Warfare Suite, a spread of digital receivers, jammers, and decoy controllers, giving the pilot a 360-degree picture of who's looking at them and the means to blind whoever is. Saab built this jet from the ground up to keep fighting when its radar is degraded, its data link is being chopped up, and its GPS is being spoofed. In other words, they built it for exactly the electromagnetic hell that Russia has turned East Ukraine into. And there's one more thing about this jet that's almost tailor-made for Ukraine, something baked into its design back in the Cold War. Swedish planners always assumed that if war came, the very first thing a Soviet attack would do is crater their main air bases. So they refused to depend on them. They built a doctrine called BAS-90 around dispersing their fighters to ordinary stretches of motorway, rearming and refueling them with tiny conscript ground crews, and getting them back into the fight from places no enemy could ever map in advance. And that doctrine guided them toward the entire Gripen line, the older C and D models, and the new E alike. These aircraft thrive in exactly that environment, having low maintenance hours, low operating cost, fast turnaround, and most importantly, no need for a pristine 2-mile runway. For decades, that doctrine looked like a quirky relic of Swedish neutrality. Then Russia spent years trying to destroy Ukraine's air bases from the air. And suddenly, a jet built to operate from a country road without a fixed home looks less like a relic and more like a prophecy. This is why the F-16s or Mirages, which are admirable fighters in their own right, have struggled to make a definitive impact in Ukraine. But the Gripen Es, being designed around that, have a chance to shine, with 16 of them confirmed to be part of a purchase deal in mid-2026. However, there's another bigger deal that could encapsulate as many as 150 aircraft over the coming decade, essentially making it not just a temporary donation, but a fully fledged part of Ukraine's air forces. Now, beyond its operational capacities, let's talk about the weapons that make the whole thing lethal. The Gripen E can carry up to 7 MBDA Meteor missiles, and the Meteor is not an ordinary air-to-air missile. Most missiles are rockets. They light a motor, burn hard for a few seconds, and then coast the rest of the way to the target, bleeding off energy the entire time. The Meteor instead uses a throttleable ramjet, a motor that keeps burning and keeps pushing all the way to impact. It cruises above Mach 4. MBDA's official figure puts its range beyond 200 kilometers, even if it's an optimistic ceiling. The part that makes the entire rocket tick is the thing that keeps its engine lit, giving it what the manufacturer calls a no-escape zone several times larger than the AMRAAM-class missiles flying today, on the order of 3 times longer in a head-on shot and as much as 6 times bigger in a tail chase. That's the volume of sky inside, which an enemy pilot simply can't outrun the missile no matter how hard they turn. Pair that missile with the aforementioned radar in the jet, and you have the one combination that could genuinely challenge Russian air power over Ukraine. So that's the hook. A single Gripen, properly armed, can push a Russian fighter back before that Russian pilot is even in range to shoot. And the Meteor does something subtler than just flying far. It carries a two-way data link, which means the missile and the launching aircraft can keep communicating with each other in flight. The jet can update the target's position after launch, hand the missile off to be guided by a completely different sensor, or fire on a track it never saw with its own radar at all. In practice, that means a Gripen can launch a Meteor at a target being painted by another aircraft or by a radar on the ground, while the plane itself stays silent and invisible, never lighting up its own radar to give away its position. And the missile is not just a missile, but just one node in a network. Of course, one spectacular aircraft paired with a highly modern missile doesn't stop an invasion. A war is not won by the most impressive machine on the field. It's won by the thing you cannot photograph as easily, the web that connects all the machines. And Sweden has actually been doing just that in Ukraine, package by package, for more than 4 years. The Gripen is just the spearhead. So let's pull back and look at the whole thing, because the real story here is not a fighter jet, but the entire defense industry ecosystem. Sweden has been engineering its military for decades around the assumption that one day it might have to fight an enemy with far more soldiers, far more tanks, and far more aircraft than it could ever field itself. A small country staring down a giant neighbor. If that scenario sounds familiar, that's exactly the point. The Swedish answer to being outnumbered was never to match the giant gun for gun. It was to see first, decide faster, and connect everything so tightly that a smaller force could land its blows precisely where they hurt and vanish before the counterpunch landed. That philosophy is now being handed piece by piece to Ukraine. Start with the eyes, because everything else depends on them. In May 2024, Sweden announced what was then its largest aid package of the entire war, worth around 13 billion Swedish krona, and at the center of it sat 2 aircraft called the ASC-890. To look at it, it's unremarkable. A converted Saab 340 turboprop, the kind of small regional airliner that once shuttled business travelers between provincial airports. But Saab stripped it out and bolted it to the Eye, an AESA array that stares sideways across a 120-degree arc on each side of the fuselage. When in the air, that radar can pick out fighter-sized targets somewhere between 300 and 400 kilometers away, and it can track up to 1,000 things in the air and 500 on the surface at once. But the number that actually matters here is the angle. A radar sitting on the ground is trapped behind the curve of the Earth and behind every hill and tree line in front of it. A Russian cruise missile or a Shahed drone skimming in low can hide in that ground clutter until it's almost on top of its target. The ASC-890 flies above all of that and looks down. That look-down capability is the whole reason it exists. And against an enemy that's fired well over 100,000 drones and thousands of missiles at Ukrainian cities and power plants, an aircraft that can spot the low flyers early is not a luxury. It's the difference between a city that gets 10 minutes of warning and one that gets 90 seconds. The aircraft was first spotted flying over Ukraine in March 2026, and by Ukrainian accounts, it's already been feeding targeting data into the air defense network, with one widely reported episode crediting it with helping an F-16 down a Russian Su-35. Then there are the eyes on the ground, and this is where the Swedish radar family earns its keep. The Giraffe radars get a fraction of the attention that Patriot batteries do, and that's a mistake. Sweden has supplied Ukraine with several variants from across the Giraffe line, and according to Ukraine's own Ministry of Defense, these systems can detect aerial targets out to around 100 kilometers and up to 20 kilometers in altitude, depending on the model. We'll note that those particular figures come from the Ukrainian government, which is an interested party, so treat them as the operator's stated performance rather than an independent measurement. But the design itself is important. The Giraffe is named as such due to a folding mast that lifts the antenna up over the tree line. Like a giraffe, it can see the low, slow, small targets that hide in terrain, the cruise missiles, and the drones. It refreshes its picture every single second. It deploys in under 10 minutes and tears down in under 5, which means it can shoot a look, share what it sees, and move before a Russian counter-battery drone can find it. And crucially, it keeps working in the middle of heavy jamming. That last point is everything, because the Russian electronic warfare environment is precisely where cheaper radars go blind. So, Sweden has supplied the eyes for the Ukrainian military, but they also need the fists. Now, before we get there, make sure to subscribe to the Military Show for more daily news on the war and all major events. Back to the weapon Sweden is using to sway the war in Ukraine in its favor. The first fist it handed over is the Archer, which may be the most impressive and devastating thing in this entire package. The Archer is a 155mm self-propelled howitzer with a 52 caliber barrel, bolted onto a 6x6 articulated chassis built from a Volvo hauler, and the entire gun is automated. Where an old Soviet-towed howitzer needed a crew of 10 or 12 men sweating over it, the Archer needs 3, and they never have to leave the armored cab. From the moment a fire mission comes in, the vehicle can stop, lay the gun, and put the first shell in the air in well under 30 seconds. It can fire 8 or 9 rounds a minute, with the first 3 out in roughly 15 seconds, and then it's already rolling away. That speed directly translates to survival and better combat operations. On this battlefield, Russia hunts artillery with counter-battery radar and with drones, and the rule is brutally simple: the longer your gun sits still, the sooner it dies. The Archer uses the now well-known shoot-and-scoot tactic, where it can fire a salvo and be gone before the enemy can work out where it came from. But reach matters too. With a standard shell, the Archer can get a range of around 40 kilometers, and with the precision-guided Excalibur round, it can reach roughly 60. One gunner who spent years on a Soviet D-20, which is a similar howitzer hailing from the Soviet era, called the Archer sniper artillery. It takes one shot to get one kill, and the brigade used it to destroy a Russian self-propelled gun, confirmed by drone footage. Sweden donated the first handful early in the war, and in 2025, it authorized its procurement agency to buy 18 more specifically for Ukraine, with delivery through 2026. The second vehicle is the CV-90, and the soldiers who ride in it have given it a nickname that tells you everything: the Beast. Sweden initially sent 50 of the 40mm gun variant, and each one carries a crew of 3 plus a squad of infantry behind armor that was, in the donated version, specifically uprated for protection against mines, small caliber fire, and grenades. On a road, it will do about 70 kilometers an hour, but the reason crews love it is that the thing survives. Ukraine's 21st Mechanized Brigade has published a video of CV-90s shrugging off multiple FPV drone strikes and still driving, drawing fire away from the infantry climbing out the back. Ukrainian units have pushed it so far beyond its design that they've used it as improvised artillery. It is, by a wide margin, one of the most capable infantry fighting vehicles in Europe, and Ukraine has agreed with Sweden to eventually build it on Ukrainian soil. And then there's everything underneath the headline systems, the unglamorous mass that an army actually runs on. Across more than 28 packages, Sweden has sent STRV-122 tanks, its own up-armored version of the Leopard 2. It sent more than 200 tracked armored personnel carriers. It has sent RBS-70 air defense missiles to SWAT drones and helicopters, Carl Gustaf recoilless rifles and anti-tank weapons by the thousand, Combat Boat 90 fast assault craft for the rivers and the coast, tow missiles, ammunition, trucks, and the spare parts and training that keep all of it running. By Sweden's own official accounting, the total value of its military support to Ukraine reached roughly 128 billion Swedish krona as of early 2026, with a framework worth another 80 billion locked in for 2026 and 2027. This is not charity in dribs and drabs. This is a small nation pouring a serious fraction of its defense industrial base into another country's survival. So now, finally, we can answer the real question, the one the title of this video is really asking. How could all of this actually stop Russia? Because it's not the jet or the howitzer or any other machine on display. It's what happens when you wire them together. And that's the thing Sweden understands better than almost anyone, because it's the thing they built their entire defense doctrine around. The ASC-890 is orbiting high over central Ukraine, looking down, and it catches a flight of Russian aircraft forming up to launch glide bombs. It passes those tracks down the data link. A giraffe radar near the front confirms and refines the picture. A Gripen E, sitting on a dispersed strip far from any targetable airbase, gets the cue, comes up, and launches a Meteor from a distance, at which the Russian pilot has no good answer, forcing him to turn and run before he can ever release his bombs. Meanwhile, the same network that vectored that missile is telling an Archer crew where a Russian battery just fired from, and that Archer puts a precision shell on it and is moving before the smoke clears. That's the logic, and it's worth dwelling on because it's genuinely elegant. Russia's advantage in this war has always been mass, more guns, more planes, more bodies. The answer from Ukraine and Sweden isn't to match the mass, but to attack the cause instead of the symptom. You don't just shoot down the glide bombs one by one, an exhausting and losing game. You push back the aircraft that carry them so the bombs are never launched. You don't just dig in and absorb the artillery. You see the gun the instant it fires and kill it. Every layer of this system is designed to let a smaller, smarter force decide and strike faster than a larger, clumsier one can react. That's how Sweden always planned to survive its own much larger neighbour, and now Ukraine has inherited the blueprint. And there's a second payoff hiding inside this partnership, and it points at the future even more than the present. This relationship runs in both directions. Ukraine isn't just a recipient. Every single day, Ukrainian crews are firing these Swedish systems in the most intense, most technologically saturated war of this century. They're fighting against live electronic warfare, swarms of drones, and an enemy that adapts week to week. That generates something no Swedish test range on Earth could ever produce: real combat data on how every one of these machines actually behaves when someone is genuinely trying to destroy it. Sweden gets that feedback, so Saab gets to find the flaws and fix them faster than any peacetime program ever could. The partnership is basically giving Sweden all the testing they need against an enemy that it always thought it'd face. That can speed up development to what we've already seen Ukraine accomplish, prototypes done within months rather than years. Of course, this all hinges on the fact that Ukraine manages to get its production up and running, and even then, it's still fighting an uphill battle. The Gripen E deal is enormous, a letter of intent for up to 150 jets, which would be the largest Gripen export in history and one of the largest arms deals Europe has ever seen. But these are not arriving tomorrow, but should start being sent around 2030 and stretch through the decade. The older C&D models that could come sooner are aging hand-me-downs, limited in number by airframe fatigue, and they lack the very systems that make the E so dangerous. And Russia won't stand still. It adapts, it jams, it builds, and it will hunt every high-value system on this list, the early warning aircraft most of all. Even then, the scale of the project is enormous. Sweden and Ukraine have built a complete, layered, modern air and ground defense architecture. The jet is the part that makes the headlines. The system is the part that wins. And the longer this partnership runs, the more it stops being about Sweden helping Ukraine survive a war, and the more it becomes about the two of them, together, writing the manual for how the next one gets fought. But the war won't be won defensively. That's where the offensive power of Ukraine's long-range missiles comes in. To learn more, make sure to check out this video and subscribe to The Military Show for more content like this every day.